these seem to be pretty serious things. Now, you have a historical perspective of what the United States has done in the Civil War and World War I, World War II. How does this stack up with things that have happened in the past?
It pales everything else. It's beyond everything else. If we go back to what American school children still hear about as an unfortunate thing in American history that was corrected, you know, and so that everything is okay ever since. The Third Alien Act of July 1798 provided that the President of the United States, in the event of a declared war, and the war would have been declared against France, the President then could arrest, imprison, and banish aliens from the homeland of the country with which the United States was making war. Okay, it had to be war declared, and the abuse, the disregard of the rights of aliens only from the country in belligerency. And it was never invoked. Nobody was touched by that action because of a storm of protest.
Now, Henry Gonzalez said that if there is a formal declaration of law, all of these of war, that all of these acts, like the 1918 Sedition Act and the Espionage Act of 1917, they would automatically come back into effect.
I think he's in error. There were 4 major laws made during World War I. The 2 you mentioned, and then one called the Sabotage Act, which made it a crime against the war interests of the United States to stop working, which is to say, to participate in the strike.
Right.
And then there was a 4th, final, sweeping Alien Act, in which not just Germans, but any aliens could be put in jail if they were suspect, and chiefly suspect of anarchism. Now, I don't think those laws can be re-invoked. They weren't in World War II. That's why the Smith Act was written. But what we have here is a record of preparing for war by preparing to make a kind of war against our own people. In the U.S. Constitution, every alien has every protection that we citizens have. And these laws suspended that, and those laws have been held constitutional.
And this FEMA stuff isn't just against aliens, it's against everybody.
Anybody. Now, if you go down to the Smith Act of 1940, the Alien Registration Act, no time of war, all right? It's because of a situation in which war may become likely. Any alien of any nationality can be detained or deported for any suspicious action to the safety of the United States. That's getting more extreme, but at least the context is war is likely. Now we have, in 1940, there was not a politician in the United States who, when he thought of the word war in connection with the United States, did not assume a congressional debate and a vote to declare war. Now there isn't a politician who thinks that any such debate is plausible anymore. That's a great, regrettable change. The Emergency Detention Act of 1950, which is part of the so-called McCarran Act, absented the condition of war altogether. It was for an emergency to be declared by the presidency. Those emergencies included the declaration of war or invasion or insurrection of in the United States, or threat of insurrection in the United States. And then anybody, alien or naturalized, could be incarcerated on suspicion that that person would conspire to commit an act. So it's no overt acts even.
And the president could just declare the situation just on his own. He didn't have to get approval or anything.
Yes. Right? The American president vetoed that act, and it passed over his veto. It has since been repealed in 1971, but for all we know, given the clandestine character of so many operations, it's incorporated into this present act for preparing for an emergency.
Well, even at that, there was a study made in the early 70s after the act was supposedly repealed, and the concentration camps which they'd set up were still in a caretaker status.
And some of those were the ones prepared for the Japanese, 120,000 Japanese Americans who were incarcerated during World War II. During World War I, there were severe measures, the Espionage Acts and the Sedition Acts, which didn't have anything to do with espionage. They had to do with criticism of the U.S. government.
And don't forget that there's plenty of precedent of the government jailing anti-war dissidents. 30,000 people jailed in the Civil War for protesting the war. 6,000 jailed in World War I for protesting the war. Remember Kate Richards O'Hare saying the women of the United States are nothing but brood sows producing sons to be put into the army to be turned into fertilizer, and she was sentenced to 5 years in jail for anti-war talk.
We do have to remember, in all justice and candor, that much of the repression which has occurred in this country has been popular. That is, the population has supported it. And it was assured by its government that it was justified and, in fact, necessary for the preservation of American values. And the American people have always rested uneasily with that. They've regretted each Red Scare, at least to some extent. But for a while it's been popular, and the Constitution is there in part to protect those of us who are going to say something that our countrymen don't want to hear. We're supposed to be able to say it. And these government programs have been designed to crush us if we've tried.
And what's at stake is freedom. Freedoms that we have sometimes inaccurately boasted about, but freedom, the system of democracy itself. There are cynical people in the world, including in this country, who are quite happy to take away your freedom if you'll let them do it. And this is what's at stake right now.
What the American people must never forget is that when fascism comes to America, it will come wrapped in an American flag. And that's something that I have never forgotten, because that's the problem that we face today. And we have to be very open about this. What are we facing? We're facing the road to fascism. And when we understand that, millions and millions of American people will stand up and will fight for the elementary preservation of the American system of government.